Hello, everyone, again. Thank you for joining us. My name is May Whiting. I am the Data and Research Director at Alabama Possible. And today our webinar is titled Navigating Financial Aid for Immigrant Families. So just as a disclaimer before we start, the information that we're providing today is current as of today, February 13th. As many of you know, information for the 2024-25 cycle is continuously evolving. So what we share today might get updated later on down the road. We want to take a moment to thank all of our sponsors who support this work of the Alabama Goes to College campaign. All of these professional development trainings are provided for free thanks to the generous sponsorship of everyone you see on this screen. We would also like to thank our partners. We have the Alabama Commission on Higher Education, Alabama Community College System, the Alabama State Department of Education, and then we also have Get Educated, the Common Black College Application. A few housekeeping notes before we begin. So please keep your microphones on mute at all times just so that we can avoid feedback during our presentation. All of our professional development webinars are recorded and then posted to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/alabamapossible. Throughout today's presentation, you can submit questions using the chat feature. We are also going to have some poll questions, both at the beginning, middle, and end of today's session. So you can respond to those poll questions. We encourage everyone to respond, but especially our high school educators who are looking to receive professional development credit. And then social work CEUs are available, and we'll have more detailed information towards the end of today's presentation. So we would love it if you could share your commitment to building a college-going culture on social media. You can find us on several platforms listed here. We are at AL Goes to College. And while you're sharing all of the wonderful work that you're doing within your community, feel free to use the hashtags that you see below. That way we can just find each other's work, learn from each other, and really celebrate all of the effort that you're putting into supporting your students. So we especially encourage you to use hashtag FAFSA when posting any financial aid related content. So if you are a high school educator, and if for some reason your high school is not yet registered for the Alabama Goes to College campaign, you still can do so. You can register at the link you see on the screen, alabamapossible.org/register 2023-24. And so if you are somewhat new to our Alabama Goes to College campaign, it is comprised of 3 different components that you see here on the screen. Today, we're going to cover the first component, Cash for College. The goal of Cash for College is for every single graduating senior to complete their free application for federal student aid before they graduate for high school. And that's because we want to make sure that they access federal, state, and institutional aid to pay for any education or training after high school. Now we do have a poll question. So y'all should see that question pop up on your screen. So yeah, we just want to know if you're supporting this population, who is the main person that your students and families are connecting with while they're planning for college and their future careers?
Yeah, absolutely. So the highest percentage is counselor.
Okay, counselor. So I know we have a lot of high school educators in the room. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being that main point of contact for our students, and we will continue onward. All right, so our agenda for today, we're going to review key terms and data. We're going to provide some updates on relevant federal policy. We're going to describe federal aid eligibility based on citizenship status. We'll discuss some practical steps for completing the 2024-25 FAFSA. We'll review aid options for students who are ineligible to complete the FAFSA. And then we'll explore some strategies and tools for working with families. So I am going to turn it over to Michaela to allow her to introduce herself and then to cover some key terms and data.
Thank you, May. Hello, everyone. My name is Micaela Orr, and I am a program manager at HICA, which, if you're not familiar with HICA, we are the Hispanic Interest Coalition of Alabama. We have been located in the Birmingham metro area for 25 years now. We're celebrating our 25th year. And so we do a lot of work around assisting Spanish speakers and students who are immigrants or come from families that are immigrant families in kind of navigating their path for after high school. And so a lot of times we do talk about things like FAFSA, financial aid, how do I pay for college, and just navigating all of those things. And so that's why I'm here today. And so I'm going to go ahead and get started with kind of discussing really quickly, kind of setting the stage for the conversation we're going to have today. And so first, we're going to go over just some key terms. And so immigrant just refers to people residing in the United States who were not U.S. citizens at birth. Undocumented individual, or saying like someone is undocumented, that term is a person who entered the U.S. legally, and immigration status has expired, or they've entered the U.S. without authorization. A DACA recipient is a person who has been granted protection under the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals policy. And then a dreamer is we say like documented or undocumented youth, in persons who arrived as children or youth to the US and have not been able to find a path to naturalization, or they haven't been able to find a path to obtain legal status in the country. Okay, next. So just a little overview about immigrants in Alabama. So according to the American Community Survey from 2022, 3.5% of Alabamian residents are foreign-born, meaning they were born outside of the U.S. Some major groups that are here in Alabama, immigrant groups that are here in Alabama, are going to be folks from Mexico. Generally speaking, Central America, we're seeing a lot of folks from El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and then Korea, China, Germany, and India. And then over 28,000 immigrant students, 3 years and older, are currently enrolled in pre-K through college. So that's approximately 5,100 who are in high school. And this does not count second generation students who may be the first in their family to go to college. I think that data might be from that last bullet point, might be from a few years ago, but recently I did see that I think from 0 to 18, it's like 37% of the children who are 0 to 18 are Latino, which is in Alabama, which I found very, very interesting. And that population is really, really growing here. So next slide. Okay, so we're going to jump into some of the more heavier parts of federal policy. And again, I think for our counselors and folks who are really, maybe new to working with the immigrant community, I'm sure you've maybe oftentimes have questioned, like, why is it so that there are barriers and things like that? And so we feel it's really important to just kind of share a little bit of context as you all are, working with individuals, with students and their families. So the first federal policy that we just want to talk about is the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act of 1996. So this prevents undocumented students from obtaining in-state tuition. 23 states and DC have passed laws that allow in-state tuition for the undocumented students, but Alabama is not one of those states. So, yeah, so that's that. schools have allowed documented students or students that have DACA to have in-state tuition. Here in Alabama, it's kind of, it really just depends on the institution. Some institutions are willing to give in-state tuition to students that have DACA, but I would say the majority do not. They do have to pay out of state. Next. So the next one is the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act of 1996. So this bars the provision of state and local public benefits, including post-secondary benefits for non-qualified aliens. So that's taken directly from the act itself. So what does that mean, right? So basically, it disqualifies undocumented students from accessing federal aid, in-state tuition, and other public benefits, which is, why when, we have students who are undocumented, and that's why they can't fill out the FAFSA, because they can't receive federal aid. And it also disqualifies undocumented immigrants from obtaining occupational licenses. In the US, 1 in 4 jobs requires a license or credential. So, we have students who are undocumented, and many times their option is to go to work. And there's so many great workforce programs that exist right now. But unfortunately, especially if they have to obtain some sort of certificate or a license, they're unable to do that. So, yeah, next slide. And we're going to quickly just cover DACA. And so, as I mentioned before, DACA stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. This was an executive order under the Obama administration. And basically, it allows a status for youth who were brought to the US as children. It protects them temporarily from deportation. It allows for them to have a work permit. Some cases, they can even get a driver's license. But they had to prove that they were in the country before June 15th, 2007. Next slide. And just an update, because DACA has been, been on a roller coaster ride for the past, 6, 7 years. I would say it's been in the court system. And on September 2023, a federal judge from Texas ruled that the DACA program was unlawful. So what does that mean? It just means that current DACA recipients can continue to renew their cases, but the government is no longer processing first-time applicants. And the reason why we bring this up, because a lot of the current high school students would not have qualified for this program anyways, but it is something that we get asked a lot from school counselors, and because of course y'all are really trying to find options for the students and their families, eliminate the barriers that exist. And so we did want to include this in here for y'all.
Perfect. Well, thank you. I'm now going to cover federal aid eligibility. And like Michaela expressed, a lot of this is so complex. So I want to try to be as clear as possible as we move through the slides. So just want to recap who is actually eligible for federal aid. Emphasis here on federal aid, because we will talk about other types of aid later on in the presentation. So to be fully eligible to accept federal aid, students must either be a US citizen, US national, or eligible non-citizen, and we will define these terms. Then they also have to have a valid social security number, and there are a few exceptions that you'll see listed on that bullet. They must also have a high school diploma or GED certificate, or complete an approved homeschool education, or meet one of the ability to benefit alternatives. And then more requirements for a student to be eligible. New this year with the FAFSA, they have to provide consent and approval to have federal tax information transferred from the IRS directly into their FAFSA form if they're applying for aid from July of 2024 to the end of June 2025. And then, of course, they have to be enrolled and accepted as a regular student in an eligible degree or certificate program. And then while they're in that program, they have to maintain what's called satisfactory academic progress. That progress is defined by their institution. So they will have to maintain, say, a certain GPA and complete a certain number of credits within a certain time period in order to maintain their eligibility for aid. And then they have to sign certifying statements on the FAFSA. So just to reiterate, these are requirements for students to be eligible for federal aid. So that first bullet point talked about having US citizenship or being a US national. So US citizen is defined as persons, except for the children of foreign diplomatic staff, who are born in the 50 states, the District of Columbia, and in most cases, Puerto Rico, the US Virgin Islands, Guam, and the Northern Mariana Islands. And then most persons born abroad to parents or a parent are considered US citizens if their parents are citizens as well. And then US national includes natives of American Samoa or Swains Island. And then we had that other category, that third category of eligible non-citizen. So if a student is not a US citizen or US national, they might be an eligible non-citizen. And that is true if they can provide other documentation, such as a green card if they're a permanent resident, an arrival departure record if they're a refugee, an asylee, or a parolee, a T visa, or if their parent has a T visa. So these are for victims of human trafficking. If they have battered immigrant status, so these are for victims of abuse. And then if they have citizenship of the Federated States of Micronesia, the Republic of the Marshall Islands, or the Republic of Palau. And then this also includes folks who have status under the Jay Treaty, and that is for Canadian-born Native Americans. So all of these folks are considered eligible non-citizens, and they are eligible for federal financial aid. So when the FAFSA asks for the student's citizenship status, we see the first three categories in these first two options. And for students who are eligible non-citizens, when they select this option, they will be required to enter their alien registration number. Then, as you saw, we have this last option where they're neither a US citizen nor an eligible non-citizen, meaning they're not going to be eligible for federal financial aid. So ineligible non-citizens, who does this include? If a student is neither a US citizen nor an eligible non-citizen, then they are ineligible for federal aid. And this includes if they have been granted DACA, like Michaela covered, if they only have a notice of approval to apply for permanent residence, so do not yet have their permanent residence, if they have an F1, F2, or M1 student visa, a J1 or J2 exchange visitor visa, if they have a G series visa, or if they have no protected status, so if they are undocumented. So for all these folks who are ineligible non-citizens, it is appropriate to use the available opt-out waiver since they cannot and should not complete a FAFSA. So in order to meet their graduation requirement, we would use an opt-out waiver for these folks. Now, when we're thinking about a student's aid eligibility, you might wonder, does the citizenship status of a parent impact the aid eligibility of the student? And so the parent's citizenship status does not impact a student's aid eligibility. But as many of you know, the parent's citizenship status might impact how the student actually fills out their FAFSA. So it is going to influence the steps that the student needs to take when completing their FAFSA. And then it might also impact some of the steps that follow submission of the FAFSA. So there are these follow-up tasks that we'll discuss later on that a parent's citizenship status might impact. And we strongly recommend that students with undocumented parents complete the FAFSA with an advocate who can guide them through the process from start to finish. So we hope you see Alabama Possible as an advocate, and we also hope you see wonderful partners like HICA as an advocate who can assist your students. So I just want to run through a quick eligibility scenario. So we have Marta, who was born in the US. Marta does have a social security number. And for the purposes of the FAFSA, Marta is considered a dependent student, meaning she will need to provide parent information on the FAFSA. Her parents do live and work in the United States, but they are undocumented and do not have social security numbers. So, is Marta eligible for federal aid? I'll give you just a moment to read through and think through this scenario. Okay, so Marta is eligible for federal aid because remember, federal aid depends on the student's citizenship status, and Marta was born in the US and is a US citizen. So, how would this family complete the FAFSA? Well, Marta will indicate that her parents do not have social security numbers when she's inviting them to contribute to her FAFSA. So remember, she is a dependent student. She will need to invite her parents to contribute. And her parent or parents will have to create FSA IDs using the new identity verification process that is a part of this current FAFSA cycle. So we'll cover this in more detail, but with this FAFSA cycle, every contributor on the FAFSA will have to have an FSA ID. So that's federal aid eligibility. And now we want to talk through the actual steps of completing the 2024-25 FAFSA. So like I just mentioned, this year, everyone contributing to a FAFSA has to create an FSA ID. This includes parents without social security numbers. So that includes undocumented parents. If these undocumented parents have an individual taxpayer identification number or an ITIN, they will not use that ITIN in place of their social security number. So even though they have a number to be able to complete their federal taxes, it's not a replacement for the social security number. And if you've been doing the FAFSA for many years, you know that there used to be an option where undocumented parents would enter all zeros for their social security number, and then they would sign the FAFSA by mailing in a signature page. That is no longer an option for this new FAFSA cycle. So we'll talk about what they'll do instead. So when you're creating an FSA ID, the very first page of the process, you have this personal information. And at the bottom, a parent without a social security number would check this box indicating that they do not have one. And I want to acknowledge here, many parents without social security numbers are encountering challenges, including technical glitches, when trying to complete this 7-step process of just creating the FSA ID. So we've heard from many of you through our help desk that once they click this checkbox, they click continue, they keep getting sent back to pages. So we know that there are a lot of frustrating glitches happening right now. And I would just encourage you to keep trying as it pertains to the FSA ID. We'll talk more about the actual application in just a little bit. So these parents who don't have social security numbers will verify their identity with what's called knowledge-based identity questions that are provided by TransUnion. So these are questions that might be like, what was a previous address you lived at? What is your phone number? Who was your former employer? And if the person is able to respond to those questions and get a match, then their FSA ID will be authenticated and it will be available to use immediately. If they're unsuccessful in verifying their identity, then there are more steps that are required. So when they indicate that they don't have a social security number, they will get this warning, and then they'll just acknowledge that they are a parent of a student who's applying for aid and they do not have a social security number. So it's fine to click continue. So like I mentioned, these knowledge-based identity verification questions will be asked at the very end of the FSA ID creation process. So you see here we're at step 7 of 7, and then we're presented with these questions. There is only one chance to answer the questions correctly. And if you've been working with a parent without a social security number who has gotten to the end and not seen these questions, that's because all of the information they provided on the previous screens indicated that there wasn't enough information to even produce a possible match. So TransUnion didn't even present these questions. So if you don't see these questions, it's not a glitch. That is actually intended, and that person will have to do the manual identity verification process. So if the identity match was successful, they'll see this left screen saying their account was successfully created. And if the match was unsuccessful, then they'll see the right screen indicating that they need to contact federal student aid. So I also just want to acknowledge here that we have heard from so many of you that wait times when contacting federal student aid have been significant, and that this is a part of the process that they have to do for manual identity proofing. They have to acquire a case number. We have been told that parents can contact federal student aid not only through the phone line, but also through live chat or email. I don't know if any of you have had success with the live chat or email. And Michaela, I didn't know if you wanted to add right here since you hopped on.
Yes, thank you, May. I just also wanted to share that we've also have been encountering the same issues as well. And we've tried the live chat a few times, and I don't think it's worked for us in these cases, and maybe it's just a glitch. But also I think I do want to share quickly that we know that there is an English line and there is a Spanish line that you can call. And we have tried to call the English line as advocates for the families and also as interpreters. And we have received some information from folks that are handling the call center that they need to speak to the actual individual that they're trying to verify their identity. But I do just want to make a quick case for language access. This is a federal agency, and they are required by law to provide, information and all of that in a language that an individual is more comfortable in. And so I would say if you are an interpreter or you have an interpreter working with you, by law they are allowed to be there. So I think as advocates, that's a place that we can try to advocate for the families, because sometimes the English line is a little bit easier to get on than the Spanish one. So that's all I was going to say.
And I want to say I'm truly sorry you've encountered that issue, but in the past when I've called the line, and this could vary from representative to representative, as long as the person who is trying to speak about their case was present, then we haven't had issues with someone else being on the line with them. But that doesn't seem to be the case this year for some reason. So I'm glad you made folks aware of that. And Nancy, before we proceeded onward, I wanted to see what you meant by the option not working right now. Could you elaborate either in the chat or come off mute for that?
Yeah, sure. Sorry. I thought we've been doing FAFSA help weeks in our system, my partner and I. And we were told, and it was out in the news that, if a parent does not have a social security number, that right now those kids are just stuck. There is no forward movement. That's not something that they know how to fix or are going to be able to fix quickly. And
So
that they're
that is correct in terms of the actual FAFSA. Our goal, though, is that for as many folks, for as many parents who are able to at least create their FSA ID, that they get that part of the process complete. So a lot of people have encountered glitches with the FSA ID process, but they still should be able to do that process. When it comes to the actual FAFSA, you're exactly right. Parents without social security numbers are currently unable to contribute to a FAFSA, and we'll cover that in a few slides. But please, if you're an educator attending and have been involved in this work, feel free to add your comments to the chat. We'd love to hear what you're experiencing right now. So just to get back to the FSA ID process, for parents without social security numbers who are unable to successfully verify their identity with the TransUnion questions, they have to follow a manual path to verify their identity. So first they have to contact Federal Student Aid, and that's to open up a case number. Then they have to complete an attestation form, and we have this linked in the slide so that you can access it. And then they have to submit acceptable documentation to prove their identity. And then ideally, they receive an email confirmation that their documents were verified. So these are the acceptable documents that they can provide. They have to be unexpired. So they either have to provide one of the following forms of current ID. So that's a driver's license, a state or city identification card, or a foreign passport. Alternatively, they can submit a utility bill and one of the following. So they'd have to provide two documents here. So a utility bill and a municipal ID card, a utility bill and a community ID, or a utility bill and a consular identification card. So these are the unexpired documents they can use to prove their identity if they're doing the manual path. Now, if they're unable to do either the knowledge-based questions when creating their ID or the manual path, then filing a paper FAFSA might be their only option. And we do encourage you to use the paper FAFSA as an option, especially if a student has a financial aid deadline that needs to be met. Ideally, colleges and universities are being flexible with their deadlines, given that the FAFSA has been such a mess this year. We have advocated for it in the state of Alabama, and institutions have been very receptive to extending their deadlines. But if there's some kind of deadline a student needs to meet, we definitely think the paper FAFSA could be an option for those students who do have undocumented parents. We do want to mention, though, if they are filing a paper FAFSA, it is unclear how federal student aid will ultimately verify the parent's identity when the paper FAFSA is submitted. So because they're kind of skipping the knowledge-based questions and then the manual identity proofing, we're not sure if they'll have to go back and do one of those if they submit a paper FAFSA. So just know that there might be some follow-up tasks that a student has to do. So we want to launch another poll, and I know if you're able to help me out with this one. This should be titled FSA ID. So we want to know and get your feedback. Have you supported an undocumented parent who has successfully created an FSA ID? And then if you're answering yes to that, we would love for you to answer the next two questions you see. If you're answering no, you do not have to respond to the next two questions. You can just press submit. So we want to know if you have been successful in the FSA ID process, and then were you able to do that through the TransUnion questions, or were you able to do that through the manual identity proofing?
Unfortunately, of the 12 responses, we have one yes.
Okay.
And of those yeses, actually, these answers are a little confusing because we have one yes, but then we have 3 able to verify their identify with TransUnion questions, And then one, were they able to verify their identity through the manual path saying yes, and then two saying no with the manual path.
Okay. Okay. Well, perhaps just the first question got confusing, but it sounds like folks have had more success if they were presented with TransUnion questions and were able to answer those correctly. I haven't been sure how long it's been taking for folks to do the manual process, given that they have to actually send in documents to be verified. So I've been curious how long that's been taking, but it sounds like at least one person has had success with the manual path. So like Michaela mentioned in the chat, it's definitely been a frustrating and ever evolving situation. We do hope that it improves soon. We know that these families are just trying to do the best for their students. So we certainly empathize with you for how frustrating it has been. But let's continue onward beyond the FSA ID. Let's actually get into the actual application. So when we're talking about the student portion of the application, in the personal circumstances section, a dependent student will have an opportunity to invite their parent to contribute to the FAFSA. And when they invite their parent, they're going to have to provide a mailing address since their parent does not have a social security number. So again, right now, what we're talking about a student who is a US citizen who has an undocumented parent without a social. So, like Nancy mentioned and is emphasized here, parents without social security numbers are currently unable to contribute to the FAFSA until federal student aid resolves this existing issue. So they can keep trying to create their FSA IDs. Hopefully, we can at least get through that step, but they're not able to contribute to the FAFSA. So this is what it looks like when a student goes to invite their parent. They'll provide the name, date of birth, then they'll indicate that the parent does not have a social security number. And when they check that box, they should be given an option to provide a mailing address instead. So that mailing address should be above email address that you see here. What we've been told is that when a student checks this box and enters a mailing address, that the mailing address they enter has to exactly match the mailing address that the parent enters when they are creating their FSA ID. So I'm imagining that this exact match includes things like abbreviations for street or boulevard or road. And if there's any punctuation like a period or what have you, that all of that would have to exactly match. I think that was not intended, but is an unfortunate thing that has been discovered since students have been doing this process. And then this is unrelated. So this is now for a student who is not a US citizen and is instead an eligible non-citizen. Like we already mentioned in the demographics section, this student will have to provide their A number if they select this second option. So for both the student and their contributors, they will need to consent to their federal tax info being directly transferred from the IRS to the FAFSA. And that is required for them to be eligible for federal aid. And I want to mention that here because providing consent and approval is not saying, yes, I do have federal taxes, or yes, my parents have filed federal taxes. It's just giving consent for the IRS to look to see if taxes have been filed. So if you have a student who is a US citizen, their parents are undocumented and do not file taxes, they still want to provide their consent just so that the IRS can look to see if there's anything that needs to be pulled. So they're not necessarily indicating here that they do have federal tax information to be pulled. So that is the student portion of the application as it relates to this population. Now we're going to talk about the contributor portion or the parent portion. So parents who do not have social security numbers might have an ITIN, so that's an individual taxpayer identification number, and they might have that to be able to file their federal taxes. So many undocumented parents across our state do have ITINs and file federal taxes. And if the parent indicates that they don't have a social, then the FAFSA will at some point ask if they have an ITIN so that the parent can provide their ITIN and then have their tax data pulled from the IRS. So that is the main parts of the FAFSA related to this population, but we also want to discuss some follow-up tasks. So students might have different follow-up tasks that they have to complete if they are selected for verification. Y'all might remember verification is just a process that students go through where they provide additional paperwork to their college to be able to verify what they've reported on their FAFSA. And we bring this up because some of these verification tasks might be particularly difficult for students who have undocumented parents. So providing income documents or tax documents might be challenging for folks who are undocumented. And that's why, again, we just recommend that students who have undocumented parents complete the FAFSA with an advocate who can guide them through the process from start to finish, because it goes far beyond just submitting the FAFSA. It also involves follow-up tasks like verification. So I just kind of want to do some key takeaways because I know we've shared a lot so far, but only a student's citizenship status will impact their federal aid eligibility. So US citizens, US nationals, and then our big category of eligible non-citizens, all of these students are eligible for federal student aid, and so they should complete a FAFSA. A parent's citizenship status will not impact their student's aid eligibility. However, the parent's citizenship status might impact the actual steps that the student has to take to complete the FAFSA. And then it also might impact follow-up tasks that the student has. And then just to reiterate some current issues that we're experiencing. So parents without social security numbers are having trouble creating their FSA ID, but many of you indicated that they have been successful. So we have at least 3 who have done this process. Part of the issue is that they're encountering long wait times when they're contacting federal student aid to acquire a case number. Remember, that's something they have to do if they're manually verifying their identity. And then, unfortunately, as of right now, parents without social security numbers can't contribute to the FAFSA until federal student aid resolves the problem. And so our recommendation, especially if deadlines are approaching, is that students file a paper FAFSA instead. So I want to now bring back Michaela to talk about other aid options, and this is specifically for students who are ineligible for federal student aid. So remember, if we're eligible for federal student aid, we definitely want to complete a FAFSA, whether that's electronic or paper. But if we are working with students who are undocumented themselves, then we want to talk about what their aid options are.
Thank you, May. So a couple of different options. So if the student is undocumented and not eligible for federal aid, scholarships are going to be really important. So colleges and universities might offer institutional aid in the form of scholarships. So it's really important that you, check with the financial aid office at those institutions. We have, for example, Birmingham Southern. They do a great job at really identifying those students who are most in need of aid, and they typically do provide some financial resources for them. So just, always ask, right? The other is going to be through private scholarships. And so HICA has a scholarship that we put out every year. I believe that it's going to open the first week of March this year. And so we make sure that the eligibility for our scholarship is not, we don't require that they are citizens or residents, because again, we know that the undocumented community, they are really the most in need in terms of having the financial resources to go to college or to a certificate program or anything like that. Our scholarship will cover those things. But the other well-known scholarship that exists is the FIESTA scholarship. And I believe that, excuse me, I believe that opens typically late spring and is awarded early fall. And so those are two scholarships that we know for sure that do not require folks to be citizens or residents. And to be honest, the list is pretty small, at least here in Alabama. There are lots, and I think on our next slide, we're going to talk about, there are tons of scholarships that exist nationally. Get Schooled is a great resource that I know we like to use. They have a great system that you can kind of filter through, kind of depending on that individual student. Immigrants Rising, the JLV College Counseling list. Like I said, these are great databases for more of these like national scholarships. But within the state of Alabama, like I said, there are very few. And so, if you all are ever, talking to some of these organizations that have different scholarship opportunities, I think it's always a great idea to advocate for maybe considering removing that requirement. Just again, I'm always advocating for that. So next. All right, so we're gonna move into just some basic strategies and tools when talking to families. And so, of course, be mindful. Not everyone is comfortable talking about their citizenship status. It's probably best to not ask directly / letting the student and parent kind of bring it up if they're willing to. And I know that's kind of a tricky thing, especially when students are in that senior year transition. It's becoming more evident to them that maybe their status is really going to impact their future, right? A lot of their peers are getting, the driver's license and things like that. So they're really becoming aware during this time period about how all of those things are going to impact them. And so, just again, being mindful. So another way is to make your conversations more universal and inclusive. So saying things like, you will either need your parent's social security number or their mailing address if they don't have a social security number when inviting them to contribute to your FAFSA. Educate yourself. So open your doors, increase their comfort by knowing the policies beforehand and trying your best to understand how to help them. And I think all of you who are on here today are already doing that. So thank you. And then build trust by building relationships. So be aware of what situations these families may be in. My background is in social work, so I'm always thinking okay, here's the issue, but what's kind of underneath. And so just kind of being aware of those things. Next slide. So verbalize your commitment to confidentiality and discretion. Also using visuals to help show that you are committed as to being a safe resource, right? In the immigrant rights movement, we use a lot of butterflies, and the Dreamers have really taken a hold of that symbolism. And so having, like a monarch or something like that, just to show your commitment to them, right? And that you see them. Consider formulating partnerships with nonprofits, community-based organizations, trusted leaders in your community, and enlist their participation in FAFSA efforts. Obviously, HICA, Alabama Possible, we are always here to support, but I always love to see that, maybe previous graduates from your high school who are a little bit older, maybe they just graduated college, but I feel like so many students like really want to come back and really help the students who are currently going through all of this. And so a lot of our volunteers for FAFSA end up being college age students. And so really bringing them on, because I think it's also an opportunity for your current students to kind of get to know someone who's already been through it. And so it could also be kind of like a little mentorship moment, right? So avoid microaggressions. We have here linked a YouTube video about what are microaggressions, but just remembering to create a safe and private space just to have these kind of tricky conversations, right? And then going back to language access, but have interpreters available at events so that all family members can be involved. That is one of the things that we hear so often, is how parents want to be there with their students. They want to see them succeed. They want to support them to that next step. And sometimes they just feel like they can't because there's no interpretation, or materials aren't in the language that they feel most comfortable in. And so just if you have the resources, we always encourage that.
Okay, awesome. And here we have a few more resources that I wanted to include. So first we have linked the National College Attainment Network's Better FAFSA Training Toolkit. So I want to include that because they do specifically reference the immigrant population. And so feel free to look at all of their tools. They are constantly being updated. So you might see some older tools still on that webpage, but they do try to refresh everything as we receive more information. And then one thing that we mentioned earlier is Federal Students Aid webpage. It's the FAFSA issue alerts. So as you can see, here's kind of the landing page, and then it shows you all of the open issues. So right now you see that we still have an open issue of parents without Social Security numbers not being able to start a FAFSA or contribute to an existing FAFSA. So if y'all are supporting so many students, we know your time is such a valuable resource. We don't want you spinning wheels or spending time on things that truly can't be resolved right now. So because of that, we want to direct you to this page so you can see what has and has not been resolved. And of course, if we ever learn new information that will open up the FAFSA to more folks, we will definitely alert you of it through our newsletter. But just know this is a way you can check to see if federal student aid has made any progress on these issues. So this will be linked in the slides when we send them out in the follow-up email. So we had one more question in the chat that said, could folks complete a paper FAFSA after they've created an FSA ID? And absolutely, that's correct. That is actually the ideal scenario, because then their identity is already verified and then they're submitting a FAFSA. What we know, a few things about kind of the delay in this cycle is that paper FAFSAs are not being prioritized. So in March, all of the FAFSAs that have been successfully submitted, they will be processed, and then those FAFSAs will be sent off to the institutions that the student listed on their form so that those institutions can get aid offers out. But we've been told that electronic FAFSAs will be prioritized over paper FAFSAs. But still, if students need to submit a paper FAFSA to meet a deadline, we definitely encourage that they do so. But the instance that you mentioned of creating an FSA ID, that doesn't require them to then do an electronic FAFSA. They can still do the paper FAFSA. The next question I see, do parents need to send something to verify their identity if they are sending in a paper FAFSA? And that is where I think we are still unclear. The last I heard from UAspire and the National College Attainment Network is that federal student aid has not yet released what the process will be for verifying the identity. So other than creating an FSA ID, whether that's just the way that it's always existed, whether that's through the TransUnion questions or the manual path. Those are ways that we can verify identity, but outside of that, for folks who are submitting a paper FAFSA, I'm not sure how federal student aid will be verifying it. So in response to your question, I think that is still waiting to be determined, unfortunately. If you have any other questions, please feel free to submit them in the chat. I don't believe I see any more. So we would like to launch our last polls. So Ananda, if you could launch the satisfaction questions first. For all of our high school educators who want professional development credit, if you could please respond to these poll questions. We have this first set all on satisfaction, and then we will have another set after this. So please do hang on for that second set. And for those of you who are claiming professional development credit, I have the information on the slide here, but we will also send this out to you in the follow-up email. Perfect. Well, thank y'all for providing your feedback that will help us to shape future webinars. As a reminder, for those educators claiming PD credit, you will have to register with the course number and section number in PowerSchool. So please do that within 48 hours. We also wanted to provide information for folks in social work to get their CEUs. So you can scan this QR code. You can also send an email to the email you see on the screen if you have any questions about the CEUs. So I will give y'all a moment to be able to do that. All right, and then we have a save the date for our spring Alabama College application week. That will be next week, so February 19th through the 23rd. You might have seen an email from us yesterday that included the list of participating colleges and universities. And then we also have a spreadsheet that includes all of the waiver information for each college and university. So we hope that you will share this information with your students so that they can prepare for next week. We hope that they apply to at least one more college in the state of Alabama and in the surrounding states that are participating. And we wish y'all much success on this event. We hope it's just as successful as our fall event. As a reminder, we have our Alabama Goes to College help desk. So you can text or call us at 334-316-6155. We're happy to answer questions about financial aid or college planning and admissions in general. Thank y'all who have been just loyal texters and callers. We really appreciate how much y'all are supporting your students. You can stay connected with us in a few other ways. So you can email us algoestocollege@alabamapossible.org, and you can visit our website alabamagoestocollege.org. So we do hope you stay connected. Let's see if there were any other no other questions, but we appreciate everyone who has participated. If you have any questions, feel free to text or call us. And then I do want to extend a special thanks to our co-presenter, Micaela, who has also just been such a wonderful support of our organization and the students all across the state. So thank you so much for your time and energy today. And we hope the rest of y'all have a wonderful week.